Good afternoon. I come with a certain bias because I lived for 20 years in East and Central Africa, where to be called old was a compliment. You'll have of your generation, you'll have heard of Mzee Kenyatta. That was the same sort of word as was used earlier. Presbyteros was a mark of respect for the older person. And some people, often found people who are visitors to Africa from the West would sometimes get insulted by Africans saying, "Oh, yes, you are an old man, aren't you?" And they couldn't understand this, but it was a mark of respect. I've spent part of my career in ministry with bereaved children and did some research on that. And as I got older as well, I discovered in parish work the importance of having a balance and not just focusing on one area. And I know I can think of churches where I've been where the whole emphasis has been on, we must get more young people in. They're the church of tomorrow. And I keep saying to them, no, they're not. They're the church of today. And so are the older people as well. We're not the church of yesterday. Animals were mentioned earlier, and I used to take a dog around with me, especially in visiting older people, because you can't really stroke the vicar, but you can stroke... Not in my experience, anyway. My presentation is going to be in two parts. The first will pass on to you the results of a consultation I had with the group of seniors in Abbeydale, and the second part will be some conclusions and reflections from this. The consultation posed 4 questions. The first was, how best can Christians of pensionable age respond to Jesus' command to make disciples of all ages? And linked to this was the second, which asked, what already exists which helps seniors? As you might expect, there was the usual list of social activities, and we've heard a lot of them about these today, but along with them were things of a more spiritual nature, such as having more churches available open, more intergenerational sharing of faith. We've heard about that today as well. A lack of awareness, often among younger people, and that includes some clergy, of our needs, which can result in us going away from church feeling we've been patronised, and opportunities to share, and the confusion sometimes because going to different churches you find so many different forms of what constitutes worship. There's also the fact that a few people want to keep social occasions at a social level, just gossiping. But as someone commented, even this can be difficult if the people who come to such social groups only sit by the people they know, and a few people are left isolated. You can be just as isolated in a group as you can be by yourself. One major problem mentioned was the fact that there seems to be a lack of awareness that half the population have hearing problems. And both clergy and others leading are often very poor microphone users and fail to project. I was talking to a retired clergyman in Wiltshire, where my son now lives, a few weeks ago, and he went to a country church where most of the congregation seemed to be at least as old as he was, and he realised that the sound system wasn't terribly good, so he said, "Can you hear me at the back?" And with one voice they responded, "And also with you." There's a modern trend of leaving out consonants, or people talking too quickly so that consonants are lost. I know a lot of my friends of my age enjoy older black and white films because people like Terry Thomas and so on, you didn't need subtitles. The consonants were sounded. And another thing was the poor quality of some of the worship books, the common worship book with pink titles. I wouldn't be able to see them in this light. The third and fourth questions asked what was seen as the unmet spiritual needs of the aging, or what hindered their needs, and what could be done to assist older Christians to reach out to their peer group. There's no point in my repeating the subjects of loneliness and dementia, which have also already been dealt with very comprehensively and so well by our previous speakers. But the other points were on the conspiracies of silence, not only within families, but in the church communities on the subjects of death and dementia. I went on a round Britain cruise in September. I specifically chose it because I didn't want to be one of those people everybody avoided because they were looking for somebody to talk to, because you go ashore every day. But I managed to get the subject of faith at my dining table with 8 people on. And one woman said, "We can talk about anything at my church but death. It completely kills this conversation." And yet here we are, a faith that has the message of hope and resurrection. Ideas were very thin on the ground, I think, on the Abbeydale group, of what would help seniors to reach out to their peer group at a spiritual level rather than a simply social level. So moving on to the second part of my presentation, I want to spend a few minutes reflecting and commentating. There was a research paper which was summarised in the Church Times a few years ago that showed that a lot of people in our senior years, we've had experiences that they'd like to talk about, but they think that saying it out loud would cause other people to think they're losing their marbles. And I've heard people say this. In the right circumstances recently, I heard somebody who had an extraordinary experience, personal spiritual experiences at the door of this cathedral. It had to be a safe environment. The survey by the clinical psychologist Professor Coleman and others showed that in these later years, as many of us question our faith more and more, and we ask ourselves things like, what does the Trinity really mean? We question about it crosses our minds and we feel guilty about it. Was Jesus divine? What about the power of God over evil? And God's apparent allowance of suffering, especially when we see our own peers often suffering, and is someone we love. Why is it that because I'm alone now, my self-confidence has started to wither? I've also heard people, personally I've heard this, share some of these when they feel it's safe to do so. And what's therefore clear to me is that we need the right tools to enable this to happen, because such shared experiences often provide new visions, a new hope, a new sense of the possibility of experiencing the spiritual for other people listening, some of whom will then admit to their own experiences. I've known even such a simple tool as asking people to tell the congregation why they've chosen the particular hymn for songs of praise to unlock something that they'd never told anybody before. I've also been to songs of praise services which have been incredibly boring, because all that's happened is that now Mrs. June Smith has chosen "Oh God, our help in ages past," and then it's just a list of in that way. But when it's said why that was chosen, sometimes it's unlocked some incredible stories. And this is where the activities such as coffee mornings and knit and natter can become places of belonging that can be the support of those suffering from loneliness or losses, whether it's through retirement, loss of faculties or movement, or bereavement and enable us to move away from simply being in a place somewhere where they only talk about the weather or the shortcomings of the bus services. You'll find among the publications on this first table here one or two things I found useful. The first are the extracts from this book, which sadly is out of print, but I managed to get a couple of copies through Amazon, and I know there are some more from Amazon. A couple of the exercises from this book are printed on sheets, duplicated sheets. The two exercises are on one sheet. You only need, and there are some free copies on there. If you want to make a contribution to their printing, that would be appreciated. I said just now about having the right tools to enable people to share their experiences, and I'm going to give the flavour of one of these now, and I'm going to ask you to participate. I'm going to read out one of these small readings from this book, and I'll ask you to spend just 2 minutes each with the person next to you to answer the question on the paper you were given, the small paper which has got the quotation about treasures on earth, this little pink, this one. Archaeologists attach great importance to the discoveries of antiquities. Reflecting on this and on the current interest in television programs like the Antiques Roadshow, it has occurred to me that we, the elderly, can discover similar treasures in our own lives. Life has been a great adventure. Things that seemed of little worth have been shown to have great value. Just as uranium was once considered a waste product, has been found to be a source of atomic energy. Coming to terms with ourselves on the eve of our dissolution, we discover with surprise the riches we have accumulated throughout our lives. Working like the best tapestry makers from behind, a stitch here and knot there, using the colours God has given us, and when we turn it over, a miracle. One day we shall see the result and we will marvel at what God has done in us and through us. We must never lose heart. Our latent energy is greatest when we realise, having suffered, we have learned patience. Knowing our weakness, we can think more kindly of others. Being used to discomfort, we can handle inconvenience. The wonder of each day makes us optimistic, and we expect the best. Sometimes someone will smile at us, repeat what we've not been able to hear. Someone will give a helping hand on the stairs or say something kind. We delight in it all on awakening, thank God, and try to do the same for the others. At the end of the day, let us not ask whether we have been made happy, but rather, what have we done to make others happy today? So, taking your piece of paper, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure in a field that someone has found. He hides it again, goes off in his joy, sells everything he owns and buys the field. I'm asking you to turn to the person next to you, whether you know them or not, it doesn't matter. That's part of the exercise. Have you found your field of buried treasure? Have you found your field of buried treasure? You've got 3 minutes each.